Let's talk about attachment, because this is a super important part of what's happening to you during your deconstruction or your faith transition. But it's not something that most of us are educated about in the mainstream. Maybe if you had psychologist parents, you knew about this. What is attachment theory? I learned about attachment theory primarily from this book, and I still think it's the best book at explaining attachment theory. I know that there are a lot out there, but if you only use one, you really only need a couple sections of this book in order to have a pretty solid understanding of attachment theory. It's called Polysecure by Jessica Fern, and it's technically about polyamory and non-monogamous, or consensual non-monogamy, which is not something that I've ever practiced or that my husband has ever practiced. But as we were scoping out what the borders are of the post-Mormon space, this was something that we felt especially that I had to face, because I had so much trauma from the polygamy of Mormonism that I wanted to know why other people would say I'm not against polyamory, I am just against the way that Mormons practice polygamy, or I'm just against coercive polygamy, or I'm just against religiously mandated polygamy, or whatever. I didn't understand those statements. But this book has taught me that it's a pretty diverse playing field. It's just as diverse as any monogamous relationship. But anyway, back to attachment theory. I feel like Jessica Fern does a really good job of explaining attachment theory and also explaining triggers, because she talks about how when a threat is introduced to your attachment, when something happens, we as mammals, as Homo sapiens, naturally respond by looking for a way to stabilize ourselves. And because we are social animals, because we are warm-blooded animals, we look for other creatures or people, other attachment people, in order to stabilize and ground that energy. And when we are raised in an environment that does not have consistent caregiving, or when we have caregivers that check out on us a lot, or that have abandoned us, or that are significantly emotionally neglectful, this can warp our ability to adapt to new situations or to regulate ourselves after a disruption in our environment, because we no longer feel secure and we don't know how to get secure again, because we haven't had healthy relationship attachment styles modeled to us by those caregivers. When a child has not learned a healthy attachment style for themselves, they no longer have the ability to regulate or adapt to the world in a quick and efficient way that allows them to go back to the things that they are interested in. Instead, they engage in an unhealthy attachment behavior, which can take several different forms, but is essentially all the same in the sense that it takes them farther away from feeling secure as they look for a source to stabilize them in their fearful or panicked or disrupted energy. And until they find that way to regulate, they either keep going into that trigger, keep destabilizing themselves, or they have to numb themselves, or they have to suppress it, push it down, pretend it doesn't exist, just live over the top of that level of anxiety. Let's talk first though about the attachment styles, the 4 main attachment styles, so that you have at least the broad brushstrokes of how attachment can show up in various people. The ideal state would be secure attachment. And when someone has secure attachment, their parents or their caregivers are exhibiting protective behavior, but not rigid, suffocating behavior. This is just protective. Emotionally available, they are responsive, they are attuned. And when caregivers are responsive to a child's needs, when they show up consistently, when they allow for safe connection, when the child feels, or even the adult, when the person feels seen, heard, considered, provided for, protected, when they have a caregiver who is exhibiting those traits with them, they come into secure attachment. And if you were very lucky, you got that as a kid and you grew up with a secure attachment. However, there are a lot of other types of attachment styles too. If you have an insecure avoidant attachment style, that means that the parental or the caregiver messages to that person were that the caregivers were unavailable, they were unresponsive, they were imperceptive or misattuned to the child or the person, and they would reject the person's reality or their needs or their person. And in response to this type of caregiving, the child or the person will silence themselves. They will keep those needs to themselves because they don't feel like the caregiver is a reliable place to voice those concerns, or that the caregiver is unavailable to hear those concerns, and so it hurts more to bring those out, to work to articulate the needs, and then have them go ignored or unmet when the child does the work to have that connection. So instead, the child or the person will just keep them stuffed away, just keep them hidden, so that instead of connecting with the caregiver, they just don't expose themselves because they don't want to be rejected or left behind. The next style of insecure attachment is anxious attachment. You can be anxiously attached. And for people who experience this kind of attachment wounding, they have had caregivers that were inconsistently responsive, so sometimes there, sometimes not. They were sometimes available and attuned, and sometimes neglectful and really cold or absent. The caregivers were also probably intrusive, so maybe someone who goes into your room, messes with your stuff, takes your diary, takes your things, takes your phone, and like intrudes into the space and is not reliable at respecting boundaries. The caregiver also acts out of their needs for attention or affection instead of the child's needs or the other person's needs. And so this would be parents who are asking their children questions, or asking for feedback, or asking for therapy sometimes from their kids in a way that is primarily about the parent and not really about the child. This can develop into an anxious attachment style in which the child or the person feels like they don't have a safe private space. They're always kind of on edge because they don't know when this caregiver or this attachment force is going to come and intrude on their lives, when it's going to like come and take something away from them, when it's going to trespass their boundaries without their permission. Then the third insecure style is the disorganized attachment style. And when a child or a person has a disorganized attachment wound, it is because their parent or their caregiver has been frightening, has been threatening. So think corporal punishment, extreme seclusion, being locked in a room or in a basement, or like in a scary situation, maybe being left unattended to or lost at a grocery store, or like left at a daycare without like allowing those attachment needs to smooth over. So frightening, threatening. Disorienting, so the parent might put the child into really disorienting or overwhelming experiences without the child's permission. Maybe like sending them off on a roller coaster when they didn't want to go on a roller coaster, like shoving them into scary situations because the parent might think it's funny that the child is scared of this thing. But this would cause a disorganized attachment style in which the child or the person, the adult, doesn't know how to react with their attachment figure, and so they're kind of in between the anxious attachment and the avoidant attachment. They might switch between those two. I've also heard this called the fearful attachment style, but I think that disorganized is a better description because all of these are basically fear-based. That the anxious attachment and the avoidant attachment are based on the fear of rejection or of intrusion, and this one is more of just straight fear, like not knowing how your parent or caregiver is going to react, not knowing if they're going to be super angry, not knowing if they're going to like resort to corporal punishment or yelling or something else. The disorganized attachment style can be one of the more difficult ones to deal with, and this is the one that I had, so I get it if you're going through that too. What does all of this have to do with post-Mormonism? Well, when you go through your faith crisis or your faith deconstruction, you incur a huge attachment wound. Most of the time, for those of us who are leaving a high demand group, it is because at least some or all of our family is enmeshed in that group too. And so there are family connections, family attachments that are disrupted from that process. Then there are community attachments that are disrupted from that process. Things like bishops, stake presidents, ministers, neighbors, other leaders or friends who are leaders or mentors who have come into your life in that way as a part of your broader network of community. All of those attachments are disrupted with a faith deconstruction. Then there are the closer friends and also the intimate relation attachments. So possibly like a mixed faith marriage with your spouse. If you have older children who are significantly invested in the church, it can disrupt that attachment. And then, of course, it can disrupt close friendships that you have had from the church days. So that could be college friends, mission friends, any peer-based relationships that are maybe more than just location-based. And so they're more intimate than just a ward member would be, but they are still based on this framework of the church. And thus, when you go through a faith deconstruction, it disrupts those attachments too. And then it also disrupts your existential attachment. So your connection to spirit, to a higher power, to source, to your own body even. It can disrupt a lot of existential attachments and leave you feeling lonely, abandoned, like cosmically abandoned. It can make you feel really, really isolated in the universe. And that's because it's an attachment wound. You had an attachment to the figure of God, Jesus, the Holy Ghost, your ancestors, in Mormonism in a very particular way. And when you go through a faith deconstruction, that attachment is also disrupted. When I say disruption, it doesn't necessarily mean that that attachment is broken or lost. It just means that there is a wound that has been inflicted on the attachment, and that then it has to be tended to in order to heal and become fresh again. Because if it is not tended to, if it is just left alone, if it is neglected, abandoned, it will die, or it will become very unhealthy. But all of these attachment wounds happen like very quickly in a faith crisis, because basically as soon as people find out in a high demand group like Mormonism, when they find out that you have been questioning or that you have been reading the CES letter or whatever it is, the grapevine is effective in Mormonism, which I can really respect. I actually love the Mormon grapevine. But the news travels fast, and that can create this rupture that ripples through all of your connections very intensely and very fast. And you might have people reaching out to you on Instagram or on social media platforms, bearing their testimony to you and trying to actually repair that attachment style in a way that reinforces the church. I know that sounds weird, but I think that when friends, relatives, or other people are reaching out to you in these ways to try and like proselytize to you, when they're still in the church and you're leaving, that's actually an effort to reestablish that attachment bond with you, because their attachment is also disrupted, right? You leaving the church also disrupts their attachment to you. And so they are looking for a way to reestablish that attachment to you. However, this often backfires, because when a person who's going through a faith deconstruction receives a message like that, that breaks the attachment further. That feels like neglect. It feels like not like a lack of empathy. It feels like not being willing to listen or hear the real intensity and depth of the problems. And the difficult puzzle that all of us are given from being in a very high demand group like Mormonism and then having some people leave, the difficult puzzle that we are all faced with, whether we have left or whether we're staying Mormon, is that the high demand group does not concern itself with making bridges between these two groups. And in fact, it actually does a lot of work to make it impossible to repair that bond, to repair that attachment bond. And because of that, there are very few scripts, very few options for members who are continuing to stay active, who don't want to read the history, who don't want to be bothered by all of the stuff. There are very few options for them to retain or repair that bond of attachment with the person who's leaving. And the same with the person who's leaving. There are very few ways that any of us are taught on how to repair the bond with someone who is staying in the church when like it feels like they are staying cozy with our abuser. That's often what it feels like. And so both sides end up feeling very injured and misunderstood and like deepening their own attachment wounds. And it can cause for a lot of damaging echoes of behavior for both sides of this wounding as time goes on. For the active member, that might be like entrenching even more on the dogmas of the church, like getting even more rigid. That's pretty damaging. For the post member, it might mean getting completely loose and throwing all caution or discipline out the window as they try to like figure out what to do with their lives, and they try all the drugs and they try all the sex options and they try all of it just super fast and end up getting into like some maybe weird or sticky situations because they were reacting to this attachment wound and not finding a way to stabilize it through those means. So what do you do about all this? How do you repair attachment wounds? That is a subject for another video. But I will say that it is possible. It's possible to heal your attachment wounds, and it's not even that hard. It's mostly about consistency and about awareness. That you can do it yourself. You can do it if you're single. You can do it if you're in a relationship. And in fact, it's really a lot easier if you do have a relationship to rely on. And if you have multiple relationships to rely on, even better. But one of the cautions just at the end of this video is that like when you know that you have attachment wounds and when you know that a faith deconstruction has brought up attachment wounding for you, just slow down with your decisions, because attachment wounds almost like have their own desires, their own ideals of fulfillment. And they may or may not be the ways that you as a logical person know that you can be fulfilled. And if you try to just work over the top of your attachment wounds, what will happen is that you end up making a lot of decisions that you're not very happy with later. And of course, some people really enjoy making mistakes and having regrets and like, you know, singing sad songs about that. That's fine if that's you. I am of the school of thought that thinks like you can either learn from the pain of others or you can learn from your own pain. And I would like very much rather learn from the experiences of others as often as I can. And so I'm offering this as like my piece of wisdom for you, that if you just slow down and become more aware of your attachment style and of the attachment wounding that you have specifically gotten from the church. What kind of wound was it? Was it the wound of silence and neglect? Was it the wound of aggression from people feeling like people were attacking you? Was it a wound of threat? Were there actual threats or chasing or other like aggressive behaviors involved? Was it a combination of all of these things? Only you will know that. Only you will know your own personal profile of attachment and what kind of attachment wound leaving the church has given you. But in order to heal from it, you both need to know what that is. And you need to allow yourself to slow down and just be with that wounded part of yourself as it asks for a way to heal. Not every request that your wounding makes will be gratifiable or will be something that you should gratify. However, there are a lot of very simple mammalian needs that we can administer to ourselves in allowing ourselves to heal. But I'll talk more about healing in the next video, at least my experiences with healing and some of the general ideas about it. Until then, leave your attachment style in the comments and anything that you have done that has really nurtured you through healing in your attachment wounds, because nothing is better than a good crowdsourced problem. You know what I mean. And until next time, take care.